Chapter 10 of Almond-Blossom. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Almond-Blossom by Wadsley. Chapter 10. I put my soul into your eyes. I looked, I saw, and did not see my own soul looking back at me. Arthur Symons. Only thoughts of you remain in my heart where they have lain, perfumed thoughts of you, remaining a tired sweetness in my brain. Others leave me, all things leave me, you remain. Few people have the gift of withdrawal when they desire to attain, fewer still, and it is not an admirable quality, the power to stabilize the moment. Subtlety is required to achieve that condition, and subtlety rarely yokes with selflessness. Nearly always a subtle love imposes sacrifice. Greville played on Doro's nature like wind on flame. He was vastly intrigued himself, but he had no least wish to transform intrigue into action. For him the hazard of the game was a great charm. Doro, hesitant, nervous, delightfully young, was swept from one mood to another by Pan's attentions, his lack of them, by the endlessly disturbing sense of waiting which never left her. She could have told no one what she felt. Luckily, there was no one to watch her very closely. Rex was ill for rather a long time. G was generally with him, and Tony and Pembroke were immersed in the season's sport, which gave little opportunity for scrutiny of subtlety. Often Pan vanished to town for week-ends, and then Doro knew how the time dragged. Consciously she never said to herself at this time, "This is love." Love had held so small place in her life as a subject to be brought for examination, but she waited with a sickening sense of suspense for the arrival of the car when it had gone in to meet the 6 o'clock train. Often Pan did not come when he had said he would, and then, when she had waited in the hall and learnt of his non-arrival, she would slip away upstairs to her own sitting room and sit there in the twilight until Emilia came to dress her for dinner. She was not really unhappy. The waiting sense was an excitement. Every hour held some promise. Whimsically watching the drive one day at post time, for Pan had written occasionally from town, and this was during a visit there, she thought of the magic of the postman. Until Pan's advent he had been John Thomas from the forge. Now he was either Heaven's messenger, or a heartless old man who might as well never have been born. Pan motored down for Christmas, however, arriving on Christmas Eve laden with gifts, books for Rex, a tiny diamond wristwatch on a green ribbon with an emerald clasp for Doro, appropriate gifts for all. He came into the big hall, exclaiming at the cold, declaring he was frozen, but looking fit and smart. He sat down beside Doro, so close to her that the sleeve of his coat touched her arm. "Glad to see me?" he asked in a voice only she could hear. A wild shyness prevented her answering. "Aren't you?" Pan teased softly. "Hard-hearted being. And I have thought of meeting you, only that, all the way down in the car. The cold didn't matter because of that thought. It was like a fire, and kept me warm." He held out his hands to the real fire now, and the keen flame shone through their lean fineness. Doro felt a frantic longing to put out her hand too, and twine her fingers in those other long ones. She stole a glance at Pan's bent head, on which the firelight glowed, making his dark hair glitter a little. At last she said, very shyly, "I am so glad you came for Christmas after all." Pan laughed. He had that laugh which can hurt, which is on a note of mockery, of disbelief, it seems always. "I am indeed honoured," he said lightly. All Doro's lit happiness was extinguished by his voice. It fell away to a little heap of desolate ash, vain hopes burnt out. She rose with a murmur of some duty as hostess. Her one desire was to save her pathetic little dignity. Then as she moved she trembled uncontrollably, for Pan's hand had slid down and clasped hers. His fingers twined closely in her own. For an instant the hall, the huge leaping fire, every familiar sight and sound vanished. She felt physically faint with an overwhelming joy, and deep in her heart she asked piteously, "What happened? What happened?" Rex sauntered across. Her hand was freed, but as Pan's fingers loosed her own, again that wonderful dizzying sweetness swept over her, and she wanted to whisper, "Ah, don't take your hand away. Don't go. Don't go." "Rather in the dark over here, aren't you?" Rex's voice asked. "One moment." He leant across, and a light leapt to being. He fetched cake for Doro, and waited beside her and Pan. "Had a good time in town?" he asked Pan. "Thanks, yes. Are you better?" "Oh yes, nearly all right. I mean to hunt next week." "And when do you go back to school?" Rex laughed. He knew quite well that Pan was aware he had had to leave Eton because of his health, and the question genuinely amused him because he penetrated its reason. "I don't. I stay here." He smiled his peculiarly attractive smile, glancing at Doro, "and look after Doro." Doro protested, of course, laughed nervously. To himself Pan said, "That damned young cub's saw. How much will he suspect?" He met Rex's clear, rather aloof gaze with a hard stare. He might jibe with hidden dislike at Rex, but he acknowledged him no mean opponent. There was about Rex an effect of serenity. He gave the impression of one who had real sense of the dignity of life, despite his youth. As he leant up against one side of the high fireplace, his slight tall figure outlined against the grey stone wall with its heavy design, he was nearly as tall as Pan, and he had the same narrow virile hands and feet, the same breadth of shoulder. He stayed beside Pan and Doro, smoking imperturbably until the dressing bell rang. "Get a move on, Doro," he said then. "We've a crowd dining, and we must be down." He slid an arm through Doro's and led her away. Pan watched them, his eyes narrowed. But he had his moment later, when Doro came down early. He had known she would be early. Wearing a white chiffon frock with a silver sash and her first pearls, Tony's gift to her. They lay like clouded stars at dawn upon the faint rise of her white breast. "This," she told Pan, touching them, "is an event, did you know? Oh, but yes, for we live for the first string of pearls, the real kind, not just seed ones. When we attain the real ones, we're grown up." "No pearls, no jewels ever made, could make you more beautiful than you are," Pan said very low. "Oh," Doro said almost in a whisper. Her colour sped and returned under his words, like soft flames driven by the wind. Pan felt himself a little shaken. Again and again he had realized there was a danger. Doro was too vivid, too sensitive. He would need more control if he went far in this white yet so intriguing passion. His mouth felt a little dry now. He was seized suddenly by an almost uncontrollable impulse to kiss Doro. He mastered himself with an effort, a visible one, for he paled. "What is it?" Doro asked, her hand upon his arm. At that instant Tony appeared on the landing. He bulked there blackly, his heavy face immobile, but his small deep-set eyes glowed for a moment. Then he came down, treading very softly. "Admiring Doro's pearls, Pan?" he asked, halting beside her. "They are lovely," Pan answered too quickly. "She becomes them," Tony said in his rather hoarse voice. He stopped speaking a moment, then added broadly, "Wonder how many girls you've given pearls to, Pan, eh?" Then, chuckling huskily, he drew Doro on with him towards the drawing room. She was nearly as tall as he, and he glanced at her with needle-point scrutiny. By God, had Pan made an impression already? his dark face purpled at the thought. Pan, with his list of amours, his rotten, cheap marriage, dishonourable attempt at divorce, he said abruptly to Doro, "Run up to G and tell her I want her, will you?" Pan had entered the room. He sat down now in a big chair, and drew an illustrated towards him. Tony waited until Doro had disappeared. Then he crossed the room. He stood beside Pan, looking down at him with his impassive stare. Finally he said, "I may be wrong. I hope I am. If I am not, then, by God, you may go a beggar, do you hear?" "What on earth?" Pan asked indifferently, but his eyelids flickered. "You know all right," Tony said, his voice short as if with suppressed savagery. "And I know you know. One look at Doro that you should not give, and you go." "I suppose," Pan said with assumed indolence, "it would be quite useless for me to tell you that your what shall one call them, suspicions seem too important a word for an idea so foolish, are entirely unfounded." Tony gave a short laugh. He said nothing, but stared at Pan, an ugly little smile on his lips, the hot glow in his eyes. "I've told you," he said contemptuously. "You can take it. I mean it." He swung round with amazing swiftness for so big a man. "Hands off, or no allowance." He walked to the fireplace, cut a cigar carefully, and lit it. To himself Pan was saying in inarticulate fury, "Damn you, damn you, damn you." He laboured under no delusion with regard to Rexford's outlook. What he said he would do, he would do. Doro came back. She was singing Carmen softly. She danced into the room, her eyes seeking Pan. The words, "Si je t'aimais prends garde à toi," a challenge, a declaration to him. She danced with muted castanets, her slender hands making every gesture, and she danced as Spanish women do, with a lithe sway of the body, like the stem of a flower bending. "Tony, I'll be an opera singer yet," she cried gaily. "Darling, I will. Cavini says." She used her hands, imitating the Italian's florid manner. "Ah, but you are divine. A little later, yes, you could startle the world. Think of it, Antonio mio." "Rather not," Tony said grimly. Rex came in, and Doro showed him the pearls. He glowed responsively. "Oh, I say, how ripping, Doro!" He turned to his father, using almost his own words. "She becomes them, sir, doesn't she?" G, resplendent in black velvet and diamonds, sat down at the piano, and began to play an old-fashioned polka. "Come on, Doro," Rex urged. They danced away together, Rex's limp scarcely evident. "See me dance the polka," he sang absurdly. "Gee, what hearts have unburdened themselves to you to this sprightly step?" Doro's eyes sought Pan persistently, but he did not glance at her. One of love's little fears entered her heart, chilling its warm happiness. What had happened on this day of all days? All through the long dinner she tried to meet his glance. He would not look at her. But others did. Richard Colfax, down from his first term at Magdalen, pre-eminently therefore a blood, a man of the world, paid her extravagant compliments, drank to her incessantly, his ardent boyish face pale, his eyes aflame. Doro drank with him, or with Christopher Arundel, whose dark satiric face glowed on her. She had to divide her dances. Pan had asked for none. Again and again she danced past him, saw him, yet feigned an utter unobservance. In one of the conservatories, Richard Colfax caught her hand. "Oh, I say, Doro," his voice was trembling. You're so utterly lovely, Doro." His clasp was compelling, but Doro drew back. Here was no swift fire leaping from hand to hand, no wonderful maddening thrill which seemed to sweep one's soul towards a passionate paradise. Richard seemed like a toy, a marionette dancing steps which were jerked from it by an unknown power, and he did not matter. He did not count. She led him back to the ballroom by the promise of the next dance. Pan was near the door, and now, for one full instant, Doro's eyes and his met. His glance swerved to young Richard's white set face, and Doro saw his eyes narrow, as she had noticed they did only in moments of tension. An unreasoning sense of triumph filled her. An insane recklessness seemed to blaze up in the over-excited mind. "Ah, don't you want to dance with me, Richard?" she asked softly, allure in her every gesture, every tone of her voice. "You know I do," he said vehemently. His arm went round her, more closely than it need have done, and deliberately, her gaze still on Pan, she leant her head so near Richard's shoulder that his lips touched her hair. She stopped dancing when they neared Pan again, and walked slowly past him, talking with Richard. But again in the conservatory, all the unnatural triumph fled. "I'm so tired, Richard," she said tonelessly. "I'll get you some champagne," he answered quickly. "I won't be long. I saw a footman a moment ago." As he left the conservatory, Pan entered it. He was smiling the little fine smile which gave his face in some strange way a sharper outline. He crossed to Doro, his lithe tread noiseless on the marble floor, and stood before her. "We can hear the band from here," he said unemotionally. "Will you not finish this with me? I have indeed been on short commons to-night. Aphrodite neglects her faithful subjects, I am inclined to think. The old law, familiarity, and so forth." That bitter-sweet hurtness at his neglect, which had throbbed through her all the evening, held Doro silent. She rose and let Pan dance with her. The music came to them very faintly. Often they lost it as they danced almost noiselessly under the deeply drooping palms. Somewhere a fountain played, and its fall and ripple were audible as they went close to it. The conservatory was like a summer night after rain, as humid, as adorably fragrant of bruised leaves and growing flowers and rich earth. It seemed to Doro as though, once in Pan's arms, all pain and misery vanished, as if his touch held supreme happiness. She breathed in little panting sighs, her lips parted, her eyes wide, almost imploring. And once she drew Pan closer involuntarily, and under that slight pressure his blood quickened fiercely. He answered it by drawing her nearer, and, at the contact of her slender sweetness, the vision of her face, drained now of its rose colour, but lovely with a pale loveliness which intoxicated him, he bent his head and kissed those parted lips, drawing between his own the fluttering breath which came and went. "Doro," he whispered. She did not answer, only her eyes, mystic, rapt, fell beneath his glance. Those white eyelids, so like white wings, were as an emblem of adoring surrender. He kissed them, kissed the line of her burnished hair where it sprang away so vitally from her brow, kissed the dark eyelashes, and reached her lips again. Endless seemed those kisses which took and took, which seemed to Doro to sink into her very soul, to drain her being into Pan's. There was a sound, faint, yet Pan heard it, and in 1 second Doro found herself released, and Pan was calling Richard's name urbanely. Unconsciously she put out a hand and caught at the edge of the marble rim of the wide basin which held the fountain. Above her, about her, around her, there seemed a mystery of golden tracery, of waving leaves, of falling water like a silver veil. She heard Richard's voice as if from very far away. "You must drink this. You are faint." Mechanically she put her lips to the glass he held and drank. The trees became vast palms again. The fountain was only a silver thread which rose and fell. She could hear the echo of the music. "I say," Richard's voice came to her. You are simply dead tired, Doro. You mustn't dance any more. We'll sit it out." I think, if you don't mind, I'll go to my room," Doro said. "If you don't mind, Richard." He accompanied her to the foot of the stairs, and watched her out of sight. Her own room was dark and cool and still. She stood beside the window with closed eyes. It had really happened. It had been no dream of a restlessly sweet night. Pan and she had kissed. He did love her. He did. All the fears and doubts were over. He loved her. Her wonderful dream god, her king. Oh, that tonight could ever pass. Oh, that it might have lasted for ever. They two together at last, and all the happy unhappy strangeness done away with for ever. Oh, to die now, utterly, utterly happy, with only the memory of Pan's eyes gazing into hers, Pan's lips drinking in her soul's love. Her utter inexperience of love strove with the flame-like nature of her adoration. Her mind seemed as if it were lit by a tired blaze. Its thoughts caressed her, steeped her being in a golden warmth. She slipped suddenly on to the deep window-seat, and, like a child, put her head down on her outstretched arms. It was as if a violent storm had swept over her, and still, despite its passing, she lay spent and exhausted by it. The clear shining was yet to come. She confused herself, was shy with herself, triumphant, heavenly happy, and yet afraid. Oh, to have kept those moments, to live them again, to feel again in reality the wild rapture of that first kiss of her whole life, to live through it again, though whilst it had lasted she had wondered if she were not dying in the ecstasy of passion which had thrilled through her. Some tiny voice had said within her, "This is the end. This is the end." Then they had kissed again, and all that rapture which had seemed as if it must break her heart by its dominion, had swept over her anew. Even now, under her hand, her heart beat as if it would escape its bondage. The door opened very, very cautiously. Doro leant up, her hands pressed down on either side, wide-eyed, listening. And Pan's voice, Pan's, said, "Doro." She had reached his arms before the word had wholly left his lips. In the darkness Pan's face went ashen. He held her to him in an embrace which was madness. As fiercely he put her away from him. "I came," he said, stumbling on his words, such words making his lips stiff in such an hour, to Doro. We mustn't speak of this loving one another yet. Do you understand? Rexford, he'd be furious. Promise me it shall be a secret, our secret." "Oh, I promise. Our heavenly secret, the secret of your heart and mine. Kiss me again, only kiss me again." Still he drew back, a confused feeling which had in it miraculously pity surging over him. Doro's lips brushed his, such a fugitive young little kiss from one who knew no other kisses, but who longed to learn, and she laughed a tiny frightened little laugh after it, her hands on his shoulders, all her white sweetness offering itself to him so anxiously. The world, their world, seemed unutterably far away. For them there was but the hiding and receiving night as empire, and for music the beating of their hearts. Pan rested his hand upon Doro's heart. "Is it mine?" "It is all yours." And he felt it leap and strain beneath his hand, as if to reach him actually. For an instant he thought of holding a dove within his hand, and feeling its life throb so. He put his other arm about her, and with it drew her to him in an embrace which, for Doro, robbed heaven of its hopes, its glories, its revelation. Her very life seemed to float between her lips, to lose itself in Pan's love. She felt as if she swooned in ecstasy, half magic pain, half endless rapture. Thoughts like golden falling stars flashed through her mind. A world she had never dreamt could be seemed to open before her eyes. Dimly, dimly, Pan's voice reached her. "I love you. I love you." A door closed, and he had left her with a kiss half kissed upon her parted longing lips. "Pan!" she cried in a little broken whisper. There was no answer, only the wind blew the curtains gently inward, and they rippled like a tiny wave upon the wainscoting. He had gone. It was over. She walked to the window again, and found that she was trembling so that even those few steps were quite uncertain. But the window seat received her kindly, and she crouched down on it, her head pillowed on her arm, her face upturned to the blue black sky with its mail of silver. The night was not very cold. The wind had changed since sunset, and now blew softly. A cloud obscured the moon, and the world was hid in soft shielding darkness. Never before had the night seemed wonderful, amazing, new almost, as it did now. But now suddenly it was the time of love, the time when there need be no more concealing, no more hesitation. "Oh, I live," Doro told herself. "And oh, the rest of time is mine to love him. Pan, Pan." End of chapter 10. Recording by Maricel Kui.